Okay, we continue talking about the authenticity of the Bible, the reliability of the Bible. You know, is the Bible we have now something we can look to and regard it as an accurate record of the past? Is it something that reflects the time? And we've seen that the laws, the customs that the Bible presents reflect the time in which the events happened. And we also talked about the manuscripts of the Bible, both Old and New Testament, that the Old Testament was copied in great detail with great care, and very few changes occurred, and very few differences occur in older manuscripts and more recent. Also, again, the New Testament, well, if the stories that were related weren't true, well, there were people who were still around who could have said, yeah, I remember how that actually happened. That never happened. And we have no record of that whatsoever. I want to look at another part of, another aspect of the Bible that gives us, lends it, credibility, reliability. And that's the matter of fulfilled prophecy. The Old Testament especially is filled with prophecies. Some prophecies are relatively short term, and that the prophecies were fulfilled in the lifetime of the prophets who spoke them. For instance, I gave an account of Ahab and Jezebel. Now, Ahab is credited with being the most evil king in Jewish history, which is kind of a dubious honor to claim. Mm-hmm. You know, but yeah, very, very evil in many ways, and his wife Jezebel sometimes egged him on to even further evil and unfaithfulness. The prophecy that was given by Elijah in 1 Kings 21, 18 through 24, basically Elijah said, look, Ahab, you and your entire household, your whole family is going to be cut off. No one's going to be left. And Jezebel, well, Jezebel, you're going to fall to the ground, and there won't be enough left of you to identify you. Fairly gruesome prophecies, but also very specific. Now, these were fulfilled. The fulfillments for these are in 1 Kings 22, 37 through 38. That's when, I believe that's when Ahab, Ahab was killed in battle in 1 Kings 22, okay, which was part of the prophecy. He was wounded and died that same day. In 2 Kings 9:36, that's when his household was cut off. All the male heirs were killed. So there was no more family of Ahab. And in 2 Kings 10 and 11, that's when Jezebel met her end, that Jehu, the aspiring king at the time, called her servants that were on a balcony with her to faithfulness, and they voluntarily, willingly threw her off the balcony. She fell to the ground, dying.
Couldn't fly, I guess.
Was that? No.
Couldn't fly.
She couldn't fly. Nope, couldn't fly. No Mary Poppins back then. And dogs came and devoured her body so that there was nothing left except for feet and hands, which really couldn't be identified. So the words of that prophecy were fulfilled in the lifetime of Elijah. Now, true, some scholars you'll read say that, oh yeah, well, all these prophecies were put in there after the fact, that they might have had the histories written down, but they went back and put the prophecies in the stories, which is highly unlikely. First, we don't have any copies of those stories without the prophecies. If it was something added later, there's a pretty good chance we'd have the original copies hanging around somewhere, but no copies without the prophecies. Second, it's part of the flow of the stories. The prophecies work in very well with the stories. There's no interruption of the text or of the flow.
What do you mean by that?
Well, sometimes when you insert something, the tone changes or certain details change. I can't give you an example. Well, something like, it was a warm and sunny day here in the meadow, and we were enjoying the wonderful sunshine. Everyone was in a gloomy mood at that time, and so there was no encouraging talk. But we heard the birds tweeting, and I mean, that's something that doesn't belong there.
Yep.
And that's a very simplistic example of that. Sometimes you get an abrupt cut in the story. There's a story in Mark about Jesus going to the other side of the lake with the apostles.
Okay.
And in the story, the crowd starts out by following him. But they get to the place before Jesus. Well, if they're following him, he's already left.
Yep.
Boat is faster than foot. You know, if they've already, if he's already left, how did they beat him there? That's just one example of two stories probably got combined there.
Okay.
Both true stories.
Right.
And
not really matter either way.
No, not really.
Yeah.
But it suggests that, okay, that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
So again, it flows in the story very smoothly. And so to say that they got added later is simply an interpretation of skepticism. It has no evidence behind it except for the interpreter doesn't believe in prophecy. So he's going to find some other way to explain it. There are some prophecies, though, that have farther reaching implications. Most of those are about Jesus. Now, one example of that is, there's a couple examples of that. One is from Joel chapter 2, which Peter quoted at Pentecost. Joel was probably 400 or 500 years before Jesus, and the words of Joel, the coming of the Spirit upon the people in general, that was fulfilled. The prophecies in Malachi, chapter 3 and chapter 4, prophecies talking about the forerunner of the Messiah, who would come like Elijah. Well, it describes John the Baptist perfectly. So, prophecies that occurred several hundred years before and were fulfilled in the lifetime of Jesus. So the fact that there is so much fulfilled prophecy in the Bible, and we have proof of the fulfilled prophecy, certainly gives more reliability, puts a greater emphasis on the reliability of the biblical record. We don't have a bunch of odd prophecies that we're still, there's a few that we're still waiting for, but they all fall in line with something. Which kind of brings me to my next point. Another aspect about the Bible that lends credibility to it is that there is a consistent theme woven throughout the Bible, starting from Genesis, and it works its way through Revelation. Certainly, circumstances change, cultures change, the way certain truths are expressed may be altered a little bit for the culture. But basically, the Bible is a story of God's redemption of humanity, God reaching down, seeking to redeem humanity. Humanity is never very cooperative, but God continues in his efforts to redeem and call back humanity to faithfulness. Yes, there are consequences for those who are unfaithful and are very resistant, but still a pretty consistent theme that goes throughout the entire Bible. And I've also found that if you start reading in consecutive order, if you put the stories together chronologically, they're very tight. I mean, they follow each other very closely. It's not like somebody starts out with an army of 300 and then after the battle they have 10,000. That would be quite a stretch of details or quite an inconsistency. But the details follow, and it makes a very smooth narrative throughout. So the fact that the Bible was written over 1,500 years, that it happened probably over 2,500 years, written by a number of different people, but it's so consistent and interacts so well is again a verification that well, that there were probably outside influences helping the authors along.
So it's the Old Testament is pretty much chronological. Is that what you were saying? Also in that,
There is a chronology to it, yes.
whereas the New Testament isn't quite so much in the beginning, especially because they're all accounting the same thing
Right.
that happened. I mean, each book is correct,
Yes,
but then you
pretty
go,
much.
you know, whereas John and Mark, they kind of say similar things at times. So you can't say that's okay. Well, John happened first, then Mark happened, then whatever, so on and so forth.
Right. They all tell the same story, but in somewhat different ways,
Right.
or including different events.
Right.
Actually, you talked about the Old Testament. The first third of the Old Testament, from Genesis through Nehemiah, I think it ends with Nehemiah. They're all historical books, and they're pretty much in chronological order. Then you have the books of poetry, Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon,
Okay.
and Ecclesiastes. Those are books of poetry. We don't really have a set date on those,
Okay.
but they're poetry. Proverbs are attributed to Solomon. Psalms are attributed to David. Job is considered one of the oldest works in the Old Testament, that it might even predate Genesis or contend for a place there. I'm sorry, we have flies here. But the poetry isn't really chronological. And then you have the prophets, the major prophets and the minor prophets, and they work themselves through the history. You know, you can take sections of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and go back to the books of history and figure out where they fit in.
Okay. So it's not chronological.
No,
Just that first third is like you mentioned.
right.
Okay.
And to make it even more interesting, even the prophecies in the books are not in chronological order. That
Okay.
you have a prophecy and you have somebody dying in chapter 22 and all of a sudden he's back in chapter 27. You know, there's some switching around probably to make them more memorizable.
Okay.
That's a word. Just to link them together in a way that they flow into each other for memory's sake, because they weren't all written down immediately. So again, the consistency of the stories, the way they all fit together and so forth. The last point I want to make about the Bible being authentic, that it having outside resources, if you will, is that it presents a number of unique ideas that were neither common nor even popular at the time they were expressed. That some of the qualities, some of the virtues of the Old Testament simply are not shared by other cultures. Sometimes they're not even shared by the Jewish people, by the Hebrew people, but be that as it may, they are unique ideas. One of those ideas, I have a few examples here, and one of them is the Sabbath, the idea of a Sabbath. No other culture has a mandatory day off. No other culture has a mandatory seventh year off. No other culture has a mandatory time of Jubilee every 49 years. These are all very unique to the Jewish people. Really, the Old Testament, the Jewish law, is filled with feasts and celebrations and holy days where no work is to be done. Not a popular idea. Not many cultures did that. And the Jewish people even included slaves in that. You don't give a slave a day off, at least not in other cultures, but the Hebrew people did. They tried to be very faithful about that. Another concept that is unique to the Bible, that's unique to the scriptures, is forgiveness. That if someone wrongs you, you seek to forgive them, to work things out and to mend the relationship if possible. Most cultures thought that forgiveness was a sign of weakness. If someone wrongs you, well, wrong them even worse. You know, get back at them. That was the world's idea, but the Hebrew people, they had forgiveness. They were stressed to forgive as God forgave them. Finally, the other idea that's very unusual for the ancient world is monotheism. only the Hebrew people practiced monotheism. Every other culture had a pantheon of gods. Some of the pantheons grew to be hundreds in size. And the priests had to keep records and charts and figure out how did this one relate to that one and who's more powerful here and who's ruling that. And very complicated system. But the Hebrew people had one God over all things. Along with that, I want to mention that the concept of the gods, the pantheon of gods, was also very different in character from the God of the Hebrew people. That this pantheon of gods often acted in, well, objectionable ways. The creation story of the Assyrians and Mesopotamians, Enuma Elish, quite a story. Starts out with the god of chaos, Ea, which is just a large, dark cloud pool, springs forth Tiamat and Apsu, who are the parents of the rest of the gods. And they start producing generations of God. They get children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And there are so many that Tiamat starts complaining that they're making too much noise, which is understandable. I think a lot of parents have done that. But Apsu, her husband, takes sort of a unique approach to the solution. He plans to kill them all, making his wife happy, at least he thinks. But the children catch wind of it, and instead they kill Apsu, angering Tiamat, the mother of them all. Well, she contacts another god who makes gods and makes creatures, and he builds this army of battling gods against all of her offspring, and the offspring plan, and they finally endow one of the gods, Marduk, with ultimate power. And Marduk fights all these battle demigods, if you will, and finally defeats Tiamat. This is like a cosmic Jerry Springer show.
Yeah.
You know, it's really bizarre. You don't have God battling. You don't have God doing things like, complaining and planning to kill. You have a God who speaks and things happen. On top of that, God is separate from creation, whereas in the other systems of religion, nature, creation is the gods. The god of the Mesopotamians that I mentioned, Marduk, well, he was the sun. And the people believed that every day, literally, Marduk would ride across the sky in his flaming chariot, and they worshipped that. The Egyptian account of creation, all of the gods take a place in creation. One of the gods is the sky, another god is the ocean, another guy is the earth. So that all of the gods become creation. God is above creation. He speaks and it becomes, but he does not become it. So very, very distinctive ideas and very, very distinctive stories for the Hebrew people apart from everybody else. So those are the ways that the Bible lends itself credibility, that it gives itself authenticity, shows itself to be reliable. If you have any questions, as always, I love questions. Please put them in the comments, or you can even email me if you'd like to. But I appreciate your attention. I hope this has been helpful. And we'll catch you next time in our next subject, to be determined.
Thank you.
Thank you.